Greetings. I'm Brooke Lehrman, Maryland's 34th Comptroller. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar discussing the tax law changes resulting from the 2025 BRFA passed by the General Assembly. Let me start by saying thank you for doing business in Maryland, and thank you for joining us today. Our tax system is one of voluntary compliance, and we are doing our best to make sure that you and everybody else who's affected by any changes in the tax law have the information that you need to comply. Since the end of session, our agency has been hard at work implementing these tax changes that the General Assembly passed during this year's legislative session. The Office of the Comptroller of Maryland has a long history in providing timely updates to Marylanders, informing them of tax changes and updates. And I'm pleased to continue this tradition with some added features, including these interactive webinars, in addition to public outreach efforts, FAQs, one-pagers, and other opportunities our agency is creating to ensure that you have your questions answered. I know that this kind of change can be intimidating, especially if your business is implementing a new tax for the first time, but we're here to make sure you have all the tools you need to make this process as easy as possible. To ensure that you can follow our progress and get further updates, we've created a web page on our new website, marylandcomptroller.gov. This page is dedicated to tax updates from the 2025 legislative session. There, you'll find a recording of this and all other webinars and other important updates from our agency regarding these changes. Thank you again for joining this webinar, and thank you for doing business in Maryland. Your success is so important to us. Our teams are excited to delve deeper into these topics, update you on the process so far, and answer your questions. With that, I'll turn it over to the team. Please stay in touch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today to discuss state tax updates from the 2025 session of the Maryland General Assembly. A quick housekeeping note before we begin. Since the end of the legislative session, we've collected questions from stakeholders about the tax law changes, and we have done our best to incorporate answers to those questions into today's presentation. Additionally, we've created a page on our website, which is www.marylandcomptroller.gov. And that page is dedicated to providing information about the law changes. It includes frequently asked questions and answers, draft regulations, and other guidance. It will also include a recording of this webinar and copy of the slides. While we're not able to answer questions directly during today's presentation, do please feel free to use the Q&A feature if you have a question that is not addressed in the presentation. We'll do our best then to incorporate that into future updates to the information on our website. And a reminder, please do not include any confidential or proprietary information in the Q&A or the chat. On to the updates. Today, we're going to be updating you on, start off with income tax updates. I'm going to cover the new tax brackets and rates on high income taxpayers, changes to the standard deduction and itemized deductions, and I'll also explain the new capital gains surtax. Next, I'm going to talk about the expansion of the sales and use tax base through the addition of new taxable services. We've got a 3% tax on the sale of data or information technology services and also software publishing services. Understanding that there are many businesses in the technology field that have never had to charge or collect sales and use tax before, I'm going to talk a bit about sales and use tax generally, including the obligations of sellers and buyers. I'll talk about the effective date of the legislation and how that impacts contracts that are in progress as well as subscriptions. And I'm going to cover some special situations, including exemptions. And then we'll round out the sales and use tax portion with some sales and use tax updates on items that are other than technology. And then finally, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, who will be sharing practical information as well as a walkthrough on how to open a sales and use tax account in Maryland Tax Connect, which is our online portal for filing and remitting the sales and use tax. Tax year 2025 brackets and rates. Unless I specifically state otherwise, the income tax changes I'm about to discuss, they are all applicable beginning with tax year 2025 and forward. So our first change for tax year 2025, the current top marginal rate of 5.75 it increases, and there are two additional brackets and tax rates added. The 5.75% rate is now going to be capped at 500,000 for single, married filing separate, and dependent filers, and 600,000 for joint filers, head of household, and qualifying surviving spouses. You see there on the screen, there's a new bracket that's added. It's taxed at 6.25% and the appropriate income levels for that. And our new top marginal rate is going to be 6.5%. This is for filers with Maryland taxable income in excess of 1 million or 1.2 million, depending on filing status, as indicated on the chart. We've also had the ability for a county can now raise its county income tax rate to a maximum of 3.3%. Finally, based on these changes, interest for the underpayment of estimated tax will be waived for tax year 2025 if any underpayment would not have occurred, but for the increase in the income tax rates. So the fact that the law is changing here mid-year for tax year 2025, you will not be penalized any interest for that. Next, the tax year 2025 standard deduction update. The minimum standard deduction is increased to $3,350 for individual, married filing separate, and dependent filing statuses. And it is $6,700 for joint, head of household, and qualifying surviving spouse. And just for reference, in 2024, the low end, the minimum was $1,800 for single and $3,650 for joint. It's important to understand also that the phase-in is eliminated. So beginning with 25, everyone who has the same filing status as claiming the standard deduction is going to receive the same amount for their deduction, regardless of their income level. For tax year 2025 itemized deductions, if you itemize on your federal return, you are permitted to itemize your deductions on the Maryland return. However, beginning with tax year 2025, itemized deductions are now phased out for high income taxpayers. Federal adjusted gross income exceeding 100,000 for married filing separate, or 200,000 for all other filing status is the threshold where the phase out begins. And how it will work is the amount of itemized deductions that are otherwise allowed are reduced by 7.5% of the amount of your federal adjusted gross income that is in excess of the applicable threshold. We have a new, for tax year 25, we have a new capital gains surtax. What this surtax is, it imposes a 2% surtax on net capital gain that's included in Maryland adjusted gross income if the filer's federal adjusted gross income exceeds $350,000, excluding gains from the sale of the exceptions that are listed there on the slides. I'll point out a couple of the more common exceptions there. The sale of a primary residence for less than $1.5 million, as well as assets held in certain tax advantage benefit plans or retirement accounts. Those are excluded from gains in determining this capital gains surtax. The net capital gain is defined as the amount that is defined and determined under the Internal Revenue Code. The income threshold, as I mentioned, is $350,000, and it's the same regardless of filing status. The state income tax now equals the Maryland taxable income multiplied by the applicable rate, plus the capital gains surtax amount, if any. The surtax is going to apply to capital gains that are passed through to individuals from pass-through entities as well as fiduciaries. And Form K1 needs to indicate the amount of the capital gains being distributed. I think we've got 2 slides to forward. So I'm going to move on now to the sales and use tax, the data and information technology services and the software publishing services. We're going to talk about what's taxable beginning July 1st, 2025. So the law change created new taxable services. They are subject to tax at the 3% rate. So what are these services? Legislature tells us it's data or information technology services described under NAICS or NAICS sectors 518 or 519 or subsector 5415, as well as system software or application software publishing services that are described under NAICS subsector 5132. And those are all subject to the sales and use tax effective July 1st, 2025. The services that are subject to the tax are defined in reference to those NAICS sectors. It's important to understand it's the North American Industry Classification System, the 2022 edition. Services that meet these definitions are taxable, whether or not a business reports these sectors as their primary business activity code, or if that is a NAICS sector that's assigned to a procurement or a contract. You're really looking to see whether or not the activities that are listed are a description of what you are selling or purchasing. You can visit www.census.gov/NAICS and enter the appropriate code in the search field for additional details. And I've got a little snip there to show you what that 2022 search field looks like. And so if we entered, for example, subsector 5415 in that search bar, on the next, on this screen now, you see these would be the results after searching subsector 5415. And then each of those highlighted records is a link. So you'll click one, and for example, if we clicked 541511, which is custom computer programming, what you see there is the detailed list of activities that are included. Now, we don't expect everyone to have to go to the census website all the time to check based on what they're selling or buying, but we do want to make you aware that A, that's the source of the information based on the law that was passed, and B, it is available to you. But to further assist taxpayers, what we at the COM have done is we've taken all of the relevant activity descriptions from these NAICS codes that are listed in the bill, and we've included them in our emergency regulations, which you can find from our website, linked on our dedicated webpage, as I mentioned. So again, marylandcomptroller.gov. We also have the additional guidance there to help you. So we are going to make sure that there are other ways for people to find this information. We've also included them in the instructions for the sales and use tax form. We've had some questions about what qualifies as an IT service and what is a digital product. So we would encourage you to check the list of services. If you are checking on the census site, please, again, reminder, be sure you're using the 2022 edition. As an example, if you're charging for packaged computer application software, then as of July 1, you are providing a taxable service. And if you are buying packaged computer application software after July 1, you are purchasing a taxable service and you'll be required to pay the 3% sales and use tax. We've gotten the question, could you rely on a code if it's used in another context, such as on a tax return or in a procurement? And again, I would say no. We check the list of services and make sure that you're using this 2022 edition or one of the guidance items that's published by the Comptroller's office. Don't rely on codes that you may have been using for years without checking them first. For example, a quick web search for software publishing, you're going to get a lot of results that talk about subsector 51.12.10 for software publishers. However, 51.12.10, that is no longer a valid NAICS code in the 2022 edition. Software publishers are included in 5132 in the 2022 edition, which is what is referenced in the legislation. So bottom line, either look at the COM guidance, or if you are using the census site, make sure you're using the 2022 edition. And then you're going to analyze, is the thing that's being sold or purchased, does that description match any of the descriptions of the activity here? Next, so who has to collect and remit the sales and use tax? The legislature did not change the foundational sales and use tax laws that we're all familiar with, such as those when we buy tangible goods. What they did, they merely expanded the base by adding new services to the list of taxable services. And that's important to understand in terms of applying the existing law and the regulations to the sales and use tax and the administration. The same sales and use tax principles apply whether you are selling t-shirts or if you're selling technology. The Comptroller's office is not breaking any new ground here, but we are trying to assist buyers and sellers in understanding how those laws apply now to the sale of data or IT services and to software publishing services. Vendors, which are sellers, Maryland, the law calls them vendors, who are selling or delivering tangible personal property, digital codes, digital products, or taxable services in Maryland, must register for a sales and use tax account. And then they're required to collect the sales and use tax on a retail sale unless some exemption applies. There are 3 categories of sellers that are required to collect the tax. So we'll go through those quickly. An in-state seller who's selling to a Maryland buyer has to collect sales and use tax on that sale. If you're an out-of-state seller who has physical presence in Maryland, selling to Maryland buyers. So that could mean folks who are in-state, employees in-state, who are performing a service in the state of Maryland. That's an instance where the seller must collect. And the third category is remote sellers. They may not have a physical presence in Maryland. However, if you're selling to a Maryland buyer and the sales exceed the certain thresholds here, if they meet the following criteria: gross revenue from the sale of tangible personal property or taxable services delivered into Maryland exceeds $100,000 for the year, or if they make sales of tangible personal property or taxable services for delivery into Maryland in 200 or more separate transactions. Then if you meet those criteria, the seller who is a remote to Maryland but selling into Maryland, they have to collect the Maryland sales and use tax on that sale. You may have heard those referred to as Wayfair thresholds, and that's just a reference back to a Supreme Court case about the remote sellers. Wayfair was the company involved there. So if you hear that term, this is what that's referring to. These don't have to be sales to one particular customer. This is the aggregate of all of the sales activity in the year if you meet that $100,000 or 200 transaction. An example of what is not where a vendor is not required to collect the tax, I want to give you, we've gotten this question as well. If you've got a vendor who's making a sale to a customer who is completely outside of Maryland, you do not need to charge the sales and use tax. You may be required to charge sales and use tax depending on the laws in the buyer's state. For example, if they have Wayfair thresholds and you exceed them selling into some other state. But generally, a Maryland business selling to businesses outside of Maryland, as long as you are not required by that other state's law, you don't have to collect their tax, and you definitely do not have to collect the Maryland sales and use tax when there is no sale into or use in the state of Maryland. Vendors are required to have a sales and use tax license. You can obtain one of those by completing a combined registration application on our website. Visit Maryland MD Tax Connect, mdtaxconnect.gov to apply. There is no fee to apply for a sales and use tax license. It's completely free. Once you are licensed, a vendor is a trustee for the state. It's a legal obligation, and they are liable for collecting the sales and use tax for and on account of the state. Tax is generally due at the time of sale. We'll have some exceptions later. Vendors must file sales and use tax return and remit payment of the tax collected on or before the 20th of the month following the month when the sale is made. To assist in defraying the costs of compliance, there is a credit available, a credit of 0.9% of the gross amount of tax remitted, up to a maximum of $500 per return, is available as long as the sales and use tax is paid to the state on time. Interest and late payment penalty do apply if the tax is not remitted timely. And then additionally, certain officers and individuals who were responsible for payment can be held personally liable if the sales and use tax is not remitted to the state. Next, I want to show you a couple of SNPs. We have updated our sales and use tax form, which is Form 202. And you'll begin seeing this with the July returns. But these, and I apologize, it's a little bit blurry, but wanted to communicate that there are new lines here to reflect the new taxable services. The total sales of data and IT services and software publishing services, as well as the actual tax collected, are reported on a new line 16. So that's the sales. And then taxable purchases of the services that are for use, where the tax was not paid to the seller, that use tax is reported on the new line 32. And we just want to point that out because we know a business can be both a seller of services and they can also be a buyer of services. So who's responsible for paying the tax? The buyer is the one who's responsible for paying the sales and use tax. A buyer typically pays a tax to the vendor or seller who's collecting it and remitting it to the state. However, if a vendor fails to collect the sales and use tax, then a buyer who's using the tangible personal property or the digital code, the digital product, or the taxable service in Maryland is responsible for remitting the use tax to the state. So an example of when a vendor might fail to collect the tax, say you are in fact buying from a remote seller and they have not met those Wayfair thresholds. They have fewer than 200 transactions and they have fewer than $100,000 sales into Maryland in a year. So in that case, the vendor would not be collecting the tax, but the buyer would be responsible for remitting the use tax. And as we showed you before, and again here, buyer is going to report that use tax due on line 32. Then I want to talk about next the effective dates and the impacts on contracts and subscriptions. We know this is a topic of interest to a lot of businesses. Contracts for sales of digital or IT services and software publishing services that are entered into prior to July 1st, 2025 are not subject to the sales and use tax. Proper records must be maintained regarding the date and the terms of sale if the sales and use tax is not collected or if delivery or payment is made after July 1st, 2025. When you have subscription, like tax is going to be due on a subscription, a lease, or other similar periodic payments based on the subscription period, regardless of the length of the subscription or the lease, or the date the subscription was entered into. Each subscription payment period is considered to be a separate sale for sales and use tax purposes. Payment for the new taxable services with the subscription period due on or after July 1st, 2025 are subject to tax at the 3% rate. So if you are in the middle of a subscription for any of the new taxable services, as an example, the May subscription payment, not subject to tax. The June subscription period, not subject to tax. But the July subscription period, that one will be subject to the 3% tax. Then another example here, a contractor who purchases data or IT services or software publishing services after July 1st, 2025, in order to perform a service that's delivered as part of a contract entered into before July 1st, 2025, they must pay the 3% sales and use tax. In this case, the contractor's cost of performance has increased. To state that another way, if a contractor has bid based on an estimate of their costs and they're awarded that contract and it's signed, if you have not engaged your subcontractors or purchased the materials that you need, you know, cloud subscription services, software, etc., contracting services, if you have not completed those contracts before July 1st, 2025, you're going to initiate them after July 1st. That is a new sale, and that will be subject to the 3% tax. That's an example where the contract was not entered before the contract with the subcontractor or for your material. That's not taking place before July 1st. So your cost of performance is going to have increased there. Next, we'll talk about some special situations. We have two brand new exemptions that apply to the sale of digital or IT services and software publishing services. The first of these is the sale of cloud computing to cybersecurity businesses. Those are exempt. And then second, the sale to or by certain qualified companies that are located in the University of Maryland's Discovery District. Now, those are just two new exemptions, but a reminder, all of the existing sales and use tax exemptions are still in place. And they may cause a sale that would otherwise be taxable to be exempt. So for example, if you have a sale that's for resale, which means that the buyer intends to resell the taxable service in the form that the buyer receives it or is to receive the service, and they have not used the service themselves, then they can purchase it without paying tax and they can make that resale. If you're making a sale to a charitable or nonprofit tax exempt entity, in that instance, the vendor is not required to charge a tax if the buyer presents them with a valid exemption certificate. Now, the certificate can't be expired. Exemption certificates that are issued to charitable and nonprofit entities are valid for a period of 5 years, and they have to be renewed prior to expiration. Government entities have exemption certificates that do not expire. Federal government qualifies as an exempt government entity. Next, we have a multiple points of use certificate, and that may be presented to a buyer who determines at the time of sale that the service being purchased is for use both in Maryland and outside of Maryland. The buyer needs to submit an application to the comptroller to use an MPU certificate, multiple points of use certificate. If approved, when a buyer provides a vendor with an MPU certificate, the vendor is relieved of their responsibility to collect and remit the tax. And it shifts the burden to the buyer to remit the use tax for use in Maryland by an affiliated group. Vendor just has to verify that MPU is valid, and reasonableness test is what they are selling, something that reasonably could be used both in Maryland and outside of Maryland. We also have a situation where if a sales and use tax rate that's higher than 3% could be applied to a sale of tangible personal property, a digital code, a digital product, or a taxable service, then the higher rate is required to apply to the sale. So to give you an example there, software as a service or SaaS today that's sold to an individual, that is already taxed at 6% as a digital product. SaaS that's sold for an enterprise system currently is exempt from the definition of a digital product. As of July 1, though, that enterprise system SaaS, that is going to be taxable as IT service subject to the 3% rate. Because the sale to an individual is taxable at 6%, that's an instance where the 6% rate will apply, and so they will continue to be charged 6% on sale of SaaS to an individual. That's not changing. Also, now I want to move on to just some miscellaneous updates from the 2025 session that are related to sales and use tax here. The sales and use tax rate for adult use cannabis is increasing from 9% to 12% effective July 1st, 2025. Also, the exemption of the sale of cannabis between a licensed cannabis business and a registered cannabis nursery goes into effect same July 1st, 2025. That is an extension of the current business to business exemption so that the registered cannabis nurseries are included there. Cannabinoid beverages are excluded from the definition of food for the purposes of sales and use tax. They are taxable at the cannabis rate. Some other changes, there were repeals to the following exemptions. Snack food that's sold from a vending machine. The exemption does remain for sales of milk, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, or yogurt through a vending machine. The exemption for the sale of photographic materials is repealed, as well as for custom computer software. The custom computer software repeal is because that is part of what is taxable now at 3% beginning July 1st. Additionally, there's a restriction on the exemption for sale of precious metal, bullion, or coins for sales occurring at the Baltimore Convention Center only. If the sales takes place anywhere else, those will not be exempt from the sales and use tax. So that's going to be closing out my portion. I want to thank you for your attention. What I want to do now is remind everyone, if you have additional questions, please enter those in the Q&A. But I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, and she will be talking to you about how to set up new sales and use tax account in Maryland Tax Connect. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Before we get started with walking through opening and adding a sales tax account in Maryland Tax Connect, I do want to provide a brief overview of what Maryland Tax Connect is for those that might not be familiar. Maryland Tax Connect is the Comptroller's online service portal for business taxpayers. The agency launched the new self-service portal in February of 2024 as part of an ongoing system modernization initiative, replacing the previous B-File web application. Maryland Tax Connect offers various online services, such as applying for a business tax account, viewing your business tax account information, correspondence history, as well as filing and paying on Maryland business taxes. For those that are new to filing sales tax, today we'll take a look at what you can do now to prepare to start filing your sales tax. We'll walk through completing the combined registration application, and we'll also take a look at registering for a Maryland Tax Connect profile. For anyone that hasn't filed sales tax before in Maryland, you'll need to apply for a Maryland sales tax account using the combined registration application, and we'll take a look at that in the live demonstration. You'll also need to have what's called a central registration number to be able to start filing your sales tax. What the combined registration application does is it assigns a central registration number to you as a business. You'll submit your combined registration application on the Maryland Tax Connect portal. And once that is processed, your business will be assigned a central registration number. We have advised businesses that it takes the application process takes about 3 to 5 business days. It's automated, but we do advise to allow 7 to 10 business days for processing and United States Postal Service mail. So after your application has been processed, you'll be mailed a sales tax license. Along with your sales tax license, you'll also be mailed a Maryland Tax Connect letter that contains a unique PIN. That unique PIN will be used to link your tax account to your Maryland Tax Connect profile. And that generally will, like I said, it generally takes about 7 to 10 business days for processing and mail. So with that being said, I will go ahead and share my screen and we'll take a live look at Maryland Tax Connect. Bear with me just a moment. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the Maryland Tax Connect homepage. We do have a link here to schedule a callback for assistance. If you need assistance registering, completing your application on Maryland Tax Connect, or navigating the Maryland Tax Connect portal. So what we want to take a look at is the quick links box. To complete a combined registration application, you're going to click on the third link here. And as you can see, it's labeled combined registration application. After you click the link, you'll be taken to the terms and conditions page. You'll need to check the terms and conditions box to agree before you can proceed, and you'll click next. Then you will enter in your contact information. You'll click next. Okay, this is the application. This is the first section of the application. So here you'll need to select your ID type. You'll select FEIN, that's your federal ID number, and then you'll enter in your federal ID number. You'll need to enter your social security number of the responsible agent for taxes. I also want to point out that these red asterisks indicate that the field is required. So you do need to have something entered in these fields to be able to proceed to the next section. You'll select your entity type, which will be business. You'll also indicate if you're a Maryland resident. You'll select your business ownership type, and then you'll enter in your business's legal name. You'll also indicate if your mailing address and your physical location are the same. You'll enter your mailing address. You'll also select the Maryland County, and you have the option to add a physical location. If you're selling out of a physical location, you do need to add that physical location. We'll select no for today. And then here you'll have your reason for applying. Now, if you already have a Maryland business tax account for another business tax type, such as employer withholding, you'll select the option to add a tax account. This will assign a new tax type to the existing account that you have. If you are brand new to filing business tax in Maryland, you'll then select new business. So we'll click new business today. You'll need to indicate here whether you'd like to add a previous owner. And then the account registration, you'll see various tax types that you can apply for. Today we'll apply for a sales tax account. If you do have an existing central registration number for some other business tax type, you should list it here in the field below. You'll then enter in the date of the first sales made in Maryland. And you will check the box that applies to your business for the type of sales that you are conducting. We'll move down to the bottom of this section. And here you'll see the section where you need to enter in your NAICS code. I do want to note that the classification that a business reports as their primary business activity code for federal and state income tax purposes is not determinative of whether sales and use tax is imposed on sales of services by the business. Maryland law employs the NAICS business activity descriptions to define the services subject to the Maryland sales and use tax. So today we'll enter in our NAICS code. And then here below, this section is for cannabis. So if your business has anything subject to cannabis sales, you will indicate that here in this section. We'll click continue. We'll validate your address. And then you need to enter 2 responsible parties. So we'll click add. We'll enter the responsible party, the related party information. Click continue, and you'll need to validate the address again. We'll add another related party. We'll click continue. Validate the address. And then we'll click save and continue to proceed to the next page. And here you can elect to receive filing coupons by mail. If you choose not to receive those coupons by mail, you just leave this checkbox blank. We'll click continue. And then this is the signatory page. So if there is a power of attorney that is completing this application, you'll click the box here, and then you'll also be required to upload your Maryland power of attorney form. You'll type your name here in the signature field as your electronic signature. And then we'll click continue. Here you'll see a summary of your application. You'll see a summary of everything you've entered into your application. We'll click continue. And this is an electronic acknowledgement. So by electronically acknowledging, you're submitting your application. So you'll click yes. And here you will see that you have successfully submitted your application. You'll receive a confirmation number. And after the demonstration, I'll also provide additional resources and an email address to be able to check your application status. So going back to the homepage, we'll take a look at creating your Maryland Tax Connect profile, and you can also start that now. To create your Maryland Tax Connect profile, you'll click the second link here that says create a Maryland Tax Connect profile. Again, you'll need to agree to the terms and conditions. You'll then need to enter in your contact information once again. And you will create a user ID. This is your user ID that you'll use to log in each time you log into your profile. So you need to enter in your contact information again here, and you'll enter in an email address. This email address will be used in the event that you have forgotten your password, and this will also be used to send you alerts about changes to your profile. Click next. We'll electronically acknowledge by clicking yes. And then you'll receive a confirmation number for your registration. This is the first step in the registration process. You're sent an email containing a temporary password. So let me retrieve the email and we'll take a look at that. Okay, this is what the email looks like. This is your new user confirmation. It also contains the registration number that was on the confirmation page, and you have a temporary password here. You can copy and paste this password into the password field. So we'll go ahead and copy this. You'll need to log in again using that temporary password. We'll copy the temporary password into the password field and click login. Let me try this again. Bear with me just a minute. Okay. After you log in using your temporary password, you'll need to select from 3 security questions, and you'll need to provide answers to those. These questions will be used in the event that you have to use the forgotten password link. You'll need to answer all 3 of these accurately, and then you'll be sent a temporary password. So we'll click save. We'll enter the temporary password in once again, and then you'll create your own password. Your password should be 14 characters in length. It should contain an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and a special character. Okay, click save. And here you'll see that your password has been successfully changed. You'll click continue and you'll log in once again with that new password. Bear with me just a moment. This is our testing environment, so it's a bit slower. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to try a different login to log in under. Okay. This one should. Okay, so this is the last step in the registration process. This is where you'll stop until you get your Maryland Tax Connect PIN letter. But when you do get your PIN letter, you'll select register as an administrator. And after you've done that, as you can see here, there are two options. You will select the first option if you are registering for applying for a tax account for the first time in Maryland. If you have an existing account, you do have the option, and you don't already have a Maryland Tax Connect account, you do have a second option here. You can select that second option, and you'll just need to validate your filing history on the following page. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. Here is where you'll validate your filing history if you are not new to filing business tax in Maryland. And then the first option to enter a PIN, you select the first option, you'll click next. The page looks very similar, but you'll just enter in that PIN that is associated with your FEIN. And that concludes our webinar. I'm sorry, our demonstration. Let me display another page here that has some of our Maryland Tax Connect resource information. So additional resources for Maryland Tax Connect. We also have additional FAQs. We have previously recorded webinars that go more in detail in Maryland Tax Connect services and the functionality. We also have step-by-step guides and tutorials that can be found on our business tax services page at marylandcomptroller.gov. You can also access the Maryland Tax Connect homepage by typing in mdtaxconnect.gov. And like I pointed out in the demonstration, if you do need assistance registering or navigating Maryland Tax Connect, you can select to have a callback appointment. If you would like to check the status of your combined registration application, if it's been longer than 7 to 10 business days, you can email the Central Registration Department by emailing centralregistration@marylandtaxes.gov. And that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for joining us. We hope that the information in our presentation today has been helpful. And please, again, visit our marylandcomptroller.gov page for updates and additional resources that are added to that 2025 tax changes page. Thank you.